Imagine a city where every breath is a battle, a city whose progress was measured not by triumph, but by suffering. Tonight, we journey into the heart of Victorian England, a realm of beauty and brutality, where shocking truths were concealed beneath opulence and industrial progress. From a river that reeked of death to a queen whose private indulgences betrayed her nation's darkest secrets, prepare to unearth 5 truths that history almost forgot. Stay tuned, because what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about progress. Welcome to our exploration of a side of history that your textbooks conveniently skipped. By the end of this journey, Queen Victoria's era won't seem like a golden age at all. It'll be a tale of revolting stench, deadly epidemics, and unspeakable human cruelty. Ready to see the ugly truth? Let's dive in. 1. The Great Stink. In the summer of 1858, a heat wave turned the Thames into a noxious cauldron. The river, once the lifeblood of London, now became a lethal cocktail of human waste, decomposing bodies, and toxic chemicals from burgeoning factories. Parliament was forced to confront this nightmare, a crisis dubbed the Great Stink. Desperate measures were taken. MPs soaked their curtains in lime chloride just to survive the stench during debates. But here's the twist. This repulsive catastrophe became the catalyst for one of the most transformative public health projects in history. Over 1,100 miles of sewer pipes were built to cleanse the city. Yet, while the elite celebrated this marvel of engineering, it was the impoverished who suffered the silent, lingering consequences. The very infrastructure that promised to rid London of filth also uncovered a lurking menace: cholera. Stick around, because in just moments, we'll unravel the dark tale of the Blue Death and the man who dared to challenge centuries of misguided beliefs. 2. The Cholera Killer. Cholera, infamously dubbed the Blue Death, swept through the crowded alleys and squalid neighborhoods of Victorian Britain. Imagine a malady so savage that its victims turned ghostly blue from dehydration, their bodies succumbing in horrifying swiftness. For decades, doctors assumed miasma, bad air, was to blame. But one daring physician, John Snow, had a different theory. In 1854, as cholera claimed lives indiscriminately, Snow traced the outbreak to a single water pump on Broad Street. Snow's discovery shocked a nation. His meticulous mapping revealed that contaminated water was the true culprit, a finding that could have saved countless lives if only the authorities had listened sooner. Imagine a time when a single pump could mean the difference between life and death. Yet, despite his evidence, his warnings were initially dismissed. It wasn't until the corpses piled up, undeniable and macabre, that his theory became accepted. What if I told you that this very neglect paved the way for modern epidemiology? Stay with me, because the next revelation is even more startling. A glimpse into the secret life of a mourning queen whose indulgences mirrored the neglect of her people. 3. The Black-Clad Queen. Behind the pomp and circumstance of Queen Victoria's reign lay a personal tragedy that would forever alter the course of an empire. In the wake of her beloved Prince Albert's untimely death in 1861, the Queen withdrew from public life, enveloped in a shroud of mourning. But here's the shocker. While her subjects were left to battle poverty and disease, the Queen indulged in a lifestyle of extreme excess. According to contemporary accounts, she ballooned to 5 feet tall and 280 pounds, sustained by an unending supply of cakes and opium-laced tonics. Imagine a nation on the brink of starvation, while their monarchs savored delicacies fit only for a myth. The paradox is stark: an empire built on the suffering of its people, with a queen who seemed almost oblivious to their plight. And if that wasn't enough to unsettle you, consider this: Her private indulgences were maintained by a dedicated staff of 30 cooks who orchestrated this daily feast of excess. As the Queen's castle became a gilded prison of sorrow and overindulgence, the people outside suffered immeasurably. Starvation, disease, and the horrors of child labor haunted the streets' realities too dire to ignore. Next, we explore an even darker aspect of Victorian society, a ritual so macabre it transforms grief into art. Keep watching, because what comes next will force you to question the very nature of memory and mortality. 4. Ghosts in the family album. In an era when 1 in 4 children died before their 5th birthday, the living found an unusual way to cope with loss. Families stricken with grief turned to the macabre practice of death photography. They would stage somber portraits of their departed loved ones, arranging the deceased as if they were merely sleeping. Why immortalize death? For the poor, these photographs were often the only mementos of a lost life, a final, desperate grasp at preserving the memory of someone who would otherwise be forgotten. For the wealthy, however, these images became a status symbol, a macabre marker of sophistication in a society where death was an ever-present companion. Some families even employed fastening stains metal rigs that propped up the dead for hours-long exposures, ensuring that every detail, every melancholic expression was captured with stark realism. Imagine posing for a portrait when you know the subject is no longer among the living. An eerie dance between life and death. But here's the real kicker. These death portraits weren't merely expressions of grief. They were also a form of exploitation. The practice underscored a grim reality. In a society where life was cheap, even death could be commodified. And as we peel back another layer of Victorian cruelty, prepare yourself for a revelation that will shake you to your core. 5. The tiny slaves of progress. Now we come to one of the darkest truths of Victorian progress, a truth that lays bare the human cost of an industrial revolution that thrived on exploitation. Meet the climbing boys' children, as young as 4, who were forced to scale chimneys in hazardous conditions. These tiny souls were expected to perform feats that no child or adult should ever endure. Their lungs became clogged with soot, their bodies marred by the brutal labor of an empire that valued progress above human life. Orphans were corralled into workhouses, fed on meager portions of gruel mixed with rancid oats and sawdust, as if their suffering was a necessary ingredient in the recipe for greatness. And if these children dared to complain, their only answer was punishment, flogging, starvation, and in many cases, death. The Victorians dismissed such cruelty as character building, a phrase that, when you really think about it, reeked of inhumanity and indifference. Picture this: an empire, celebrated for its cultural achievements and technological marvels, built on the backs of children who paid the ultimate price for progress. These tiny slaves were the silent witnesses to an era where every brick of modernity was laid with the blood and tears of the most vulnerable. As we stand here, decades later, it is our duty to remember the forgotten, the souls who suffered so that history could shine in its polished, heroic light. Their stories demand to be told, no matter how brutal the truth may be. So, was the Victorian era truly a golden age of progress? On the surface, it dazzled the world with innovations and grandeur. But beneath the lace and gaslights lay a world of sewage, sickness, and suffering, a dark underbelly that history often tried to forget. From the choking stench of the Great Stink to the relentless onslaught of cholera, from the private indulgences of a grieving queen to the macabre artistry of death photography, and finally, to the tragic exploitation of the youngest laborers, the true cost of progress was measured in human misery. Imagine if history had never acknowledged these truths. How different would our modern world be if the stories of these forgotten souls were erased? As you mull over these revelations, remember, history isn't polite. It's brutal, raw, and unapologetic. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark underbelly of Victorian England. If you found these truths as chilling as I did, then hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more untold stories of history's most brutal moments. And don't forget, next week, we're diving even deeper into another horrifying chapter. You won't want to miss it. History is more than dates and figures. It's a living, breathing story of human triumph and tragedy. When we peel back the layers, the truth is rarely glamorous. And if you're ready to confront the hidden scars of our past, then join us in our next episode as we unmask even more of the shadows that history tried to keep hidden. Remember, every shadow tells a story, and it's our job to listen. Until next time, this is the Skull of the Viking signing off.